Hello guys, let's talk about the period between the Plantagenets and the Wars of the Roses today. In the first slide you find the period of anarchy that followed the death of William I. William I was William of Normandy that made himself crowned in 1066, that introduced a feudal system in England that was very spread all over Europe, all over the continent, but that was introduced in England only by him. And with the feudal system, the nobles had great power because they were given the lands by the king, and in exchange for that they had to pay the military service. Here you find the complete list of the kings of the Plantagenet house. In the third slide, we are talking about Henry II. Henry II wanted to defend his French territories and reestablish order in England. As you can see in this slide, he came to the throne in 1154. It is important for three main reasons. The first one was the military reform. As I have told you, first, with the feudal system, the nobles had to pay military service to the king in exchange for the lands, but that gave them great power. And so in order to reduce the power of the nobles and to concentrate the power in his hands, he introduced a scotage tax from the nobles that they had to pay instead of the military service, and in this way he could pay with this money professional soldiers, mercenaries. Henry II was also important for the reform of justice. He regained the control of the justice system by creating some traveling judges. These judges moved all around the country, and they administered the common law, the law that was common, that was the same for all the country. And the common law was had to be used everywhere, but differently from the law administered all over Europe, that was based on the civil law of the Roman Empire, il diritto civile, and the canon law of the Church, il diritto canonico. This system was used all over Europe. In England, the laws were not written, and they were based on local customs, comparisons, and previous cases. So the existence of these judges that traveled all over the country and administered the common law made it possible that this law was the same, was administered at the same time all over the country. The third important reason for which Henry II is famous is for the religious question. He appointed Thomas Becket as Archbishop of Canterbury. Thomas Becket was a friend of his, and he thought in this way to solve the religious question by concentrating all the religious power in his hands as well. So in 1164 he introduced the constitutions of Clarendon, according to which the king was supreme in both civil and religious matters, and so the clergy were subject to the crown. But Thomas Becket was against, and so the conflict between the king and Becket lasted for a long time, until Becket was murdered by 4 knights sent by the king. For this reason, Becket became a martyr and a saint, and his shrine in Canterbury Cathedral was visited by many pilgrims since then. This event is important because it is connected to the Canterbury Tales, that is a work written, a collection of tales una raccolta di storie told by Geoffrey Chaucer, we will talk about in the next lessons. Europe was shocked by the murder of Thomas Becket, and as I have told you, Thomas Becket was made saint. In the following slide, there is the period that follows the death of Henry II. He was succeeded by his son Richard I, that was nicknamed the Lionheart. He came to the throne in 1189, so he reigned for 10 years, but in fact he didn't rule in England. Because he joined the Third Crusade. In the meanwhile, so it is in this period that the legend of Robin Hood, to which the film we are watching in this period, is connected, because it is in this period that the Sheriff of Nottingham tried to usurp the throne of the king. He was succeeded by his brother John, that became king in 1199, and he tried to regain the lost French territories, and for this reason he collected a lot of taxes to resume the war against France. And for this reason, in 1215, the barons refused to pay this tax, conspired to resist the king, occupied London, and forced King John to sign an important document, the Magna Carta. I have forgotten to tell you that John was nicknamed Soft Sword or Lackland, quindi Spada Morbida o Giovanni Senza Terra, because of his attempts, unsuccessful attempts, at regaining the French territories. In this slide you find the period between Henry II and the Magna Carta we have just talked about, summarized. Why is the Magna Carta so important? It is so important because it is also studied in history, because it is the first time the authority of the king was questioned. The Magna Carta promised freedom to all people, protected the rights of ordinary people, gave England the basis of a legal system, promised to have good and fair laws, and prevented any free man from being punished without a proper trial, quindi senza un processo vero e proprio. That is taken for granted today, that is obvious today, but it wasn't so obvious at that time when the king decided everything, and especially people who didn't count for anything were not treated fairly and could be punished without a proper trial. Well, now, in this slide, to find the birth of Parliament, that is different phases from the period when there was the Witan or council that was an assembly that the king used to be advised on important matters, to the assemblies of Henry III, that included bishops, barons, knights of the shire, shire means contea, and to representatives from the towns. Henry III was forced by, in 1216, was forced by his brother-in-law, Simon de Montfort, to summon this great council of lords, bishops, to help him taking important decisions. but the king refused in 1261, and so there was a civil war. And the third phase of the transition was the birth of the model parliament that occurred in 1295 when there was Edward I on the throne. Now let's talk about Edward III. He's famous because he resumed the war, the 100 Years' War, and he resumed it with France, the war with France, in 1337 for two important reasons. The first one, the first reason for his claim to the French throne was the fact that his mother was the sister of the French king, and the other important reason was that the French were threatening Flanders, Les Fiandres, which was the main important English wool market. And this war lasted for more than 100 years until 1453. But Edward III was also famous because he introduced the idea of chivalry, that is a set of values based on bravery, loyalty, honesty, and glory, which the perfect knight had to respect, and that was linked to the cycle of Arthurian legends. As for Robin Hood, also Arthurian stories are only legends. But they are set in this period because they refer to the 24 knights that were of the Round Table, the 24 knights of the Order of the Garter, l'Ordine della Giarrettiera, that was introduced by Edward III. The same number, so, of the legendary Arthur, the same number that the legendary Arthur had chosen, who shared the ideals of honor and service. And like Edward III's Order of the Garter knights met once a year on St. George's Day at Windsor Castle, also King Arthur's Round Table knights were supposed to meet there. The Black Death, la peste bubbonica, is a terrible plague which spread across Europe in the period between 1348 and 1350, and it was caused by the fleas that were parasites, so sucked blood living on rats, which infested the ship trading with Europe, and it killed 1/3 of Britain's population. In this slide, you find the process, the cycle of the disease, but let's go very quickly to the last slides that are about the Wars of the Roses, a war that lasted for 30 years between 1455 and 1485. And it was a war between two rival families, the House of Lancaster and the House of York. The House of Lancaster represented that has its symbol the red rose, and the House of York that has its symbol the white rose. The Wars of the Roses, the events of the war it was caused by the fact that both the families, the York and Lancaster, had an equal claim to the throne as descendants of Edward III. The Lancaster king Henry VI was mentally ill, and the Duke of York, Richard, was regent during the period of the disease. Richard was defeated and killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 by the Lancastrian Henry Tudor. Henry became a king as Henry VII and was the first Tudor king, and he married the York Princess Elizabeth, making an attempt to unite the two roses.